We are here once again, the Get Foxy Show, this time with Dr. Angela DeRosa. Angela, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I know you are rocking and rolling and a busy gal, but oh my goodness, we're talking hot flashes, hormones, how we can help.
Yes. Well, it's delightful to be here. Anytime I get a chance to open my big mouth and shout the message about women's health and all the misnomers and everything, all the mystery around hormones, it just seems to be flooded in the population. And if I can worry or alleviate any of those worries or fears, I want to take those opportunities to do it. So I'm just delighted that folks like yourself want to hear what I have to say. So thank you.
You bet. You bet. Well, you're known as Dr. Hotflash. How in the world do you go from, how did you get that moniker, and how did you kind of come about becoming the expert in hot flashes?
Well, I'm going to back up and I can tell you first and foremost, my friends were the one who actually came up with the term Dr. Hotflash, because actually one of my dearest friends became one of my first patients when I opened a practice here in Arizona. And I actually had to fire her as a patient because I wanted to be her friend. So she saw my associate, but she was the one that coined the term. She goes, you're really great with treating all this stuff. And you should be called Dr. Hotflash. And it just kind of stuck ever since. And I love the name actually, because it's easy to remember. And it's really indicative, not only of what I do, but also what I stand for and what I represent. And I didn't get into this field by accident. Whenever you look back in life, so like yourself with your mother and wanting to help treat her with fibromyalgia and getting involved with acupuncture and the things that you do, I started having perimenopausal symptoms in medical school and residency, and nobody could help me. And in fact, the way I was treated was so demeaning and patronistic, and that they kept saying, oh, there, sweetheart, get more rest, exercise more, reduce your stress. Well, I mean, I'm a resident, for God's sakes. And nobody knew what was actually happening to me. And it wasn't until many years later that I realized I was in full-blown perimenopause in my 20s and went through premature ovarian failure or premature menopause at the age of 35. But instead of giving me hormones, which is what my body desperately needed, I was on 5 medications to treat the symptoms of menopause by the time I was 30. Sleep meds, antidepressants, because they all told me I was crazy, which I'm a redhead, I'm a little crazy, but not that much. And medications, cardiac meds to control my heart rate, because heart rate goes up with menopause. And so it was really a collision of personal crisis and what I was going through professionally, to be able to then navigate my career in a fashion that it was my mission to make sure that not one woman under my care would ever be treated like that. And that we need to spread the word of not only the importance of quality life when you start to have menopausal symptoms or perimenopausal symptoms, but also the damage that hormone deficiencies create in our bodies that nobody really addresses properly with the root cause, which is hormones. Instead, they give us medications that we don't need.
I have to say, I'm married to a redhead, so
You're a brave man.
Yes, well, and I'll tell you what, redheads are some of the most beautiful people on the planet.
Oh, you're so sweet.
But I will tell you, yes, this idea of telling women that, well, it's all in your head. Oh, this drives me nuts. And as a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner, with our holistic ideas that body, mind, and spirit are all connected. Mm-hmm. I see that as just denying part of a person. When you say, yeah, it's all in your head, you're crazy. Well, no, not at all. That is definitely part of what's going on with you. And it's a good indicator of what's going on. And women, I really believe women, it's so hard when they are denied, well, and told, no, this isn't right.
Well, and it's really sad because, 99.9% of the patients I see, I tell my patients, they know what's wrong. They intuitively know something's wrong with themselves, but yet in conventional medical thinking, they are denied the right to know what's wrong. And they are basically, oh, don't worry about it. It's, as you said, all in your head. And here's what's really crazy and alarming. So if a man walks into an office, a traditional medicine's office, a traditional doctor, PCP, family practice, and they start complaining of low libido, erectile dysfunction, having fatigue, they don't feel sharp anymore, lack of mental clarity, putting on weight, doctors pay attention to that. And all of a sudden they're doing their workups, and then they end up with their testosterone therapies and their erectile dysfunction drugs, which are appropriate. And they're treated with dignity and with a manner that seems urgent. A woman walks in with those exact same symptom complexes. They're either labeled fibromyalgic or crazy. And they give us antidepressants, which only makes the testosterone deficiency worse in women. And what's even more alarming is even most physicians don't realize that testosterone is our most abundant hormone in women. We make more of it than we actually do estrogen, and we ignore testosterone as a therapy for women. And it's creating a lot of damage to our bodies. And both men and women, testosterone controls glucose, which leads to weight gain, which leads to prediabetes, which leads to cardiovascular disease. And if we abate that right at the beginning with giving women back their testosterone, or men for that matter, we can prevent that whole cascade. But again, as we said, men get the therapies when they come in and complain about it. Women don't. And even more egregious is there are 31 testosterone preparations and erectile drugs for men, which, by the way, some of them can kill men, but we have 0 FDA approved testosterone products for women that are commercially available. So how is that appropriate? So they give us psych meds. They tell us it's in our head, give us psych meds, and they give men what they need.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's interesting in the fact that the majority of us would think, okay, well, testosterone, that's a very male hormone. And so, if you're putting women on testosterone, well, then they're going to get big muscles and mustaches, and
the cool ones like you.
yeah. So can you elaborate a little bit more about why testosterone is so important for women?
Yeah, and I appreciate you asking that, because you're absolutely right. Women, even when I bring it up to women who are desperate for testosterone, they've done a lot of research. They're one of their greatest fears is, oh my gosh, I'm going to get a mustache. I'm going to have hair all over my body. I'm going to be aggressive. And everything in medicine, in particular hormone levels, is about finding that sweet spot. Too little is not good, and too much is not good. I tell them, if I give you a male doses of testosterone, of course I'm going to give you a mustache and all these things, but that's not the goal. The goal is to give you female appropriate doses of testosterone. And as I mentioned, we make actually more testosterone than estradiol on a day-to-day basis quantitatively. Men actually and how I kind of look at it is men make 95% testosterone and 5% estradiol. So they do have a little estrogen, where women, we're actually closer to a 50-50 blend of the two hormones. And when you start to decline during perimenopause and menopause of those, so estrogen, we think of the common hot flashes, the night sweats, not sleeping, vaginal dryness, painful sex, all moodiness. But testosterone is actually important for libido. So it primes our libido, makes our orgasm stronger and all those things. So but I think of that as a bonus kicker. What it really does is it's Mother Nature's serotonin. So it affects our mood. When we lose our testosterone, we become depressed, anxious, apathetic. We just don't care anymore about life. We lose our zest for life. But also it's, as I alluded to, it's vitally important for glucose metabolism. And this is why biologically Mother Nature set us up completely behind the 8 ball compared to you guys. So when we eat a meal, everything converts to glucose, and that's supposed to happen. But that glucose has to go somewhere. It's actually testosterone's job to take it from the bloodstream and move it into the muscle so it can use it for energy. So this is why men lose weight faster than us. You have more muscle and more testosterone. But when we lose our little bit that we do have, that glucose has to go somewhere. So testosterone's not working appropriately because it's not there. Well, now the pancreas kicks in, it secretes more insulin, which then loves to store that glucose as fat right in our midsection. And we just continue to gain more and more weight. And until we fix the testosterone problem, it's going to continue to cycle. And then we become insulin resistant. So we see the pre-diabetes occurring, and then the diabetes, and then it leads to that whole cardiovascular risk chain. But it's interesting when women come in, they often have what are called hemoglobin A1Cs, which are an indicator of prediabetes. Within 1 month of putting them on testosterone pellets, it corrects the insulin resistance. So it's really the biggest and most baddest role that testosterone has is helping us maintain glucose control and our ability to prevent that chain from occurring. So it is a hugely important hormone, and it also gives us our executive function thinking. It helps with muscle endurance and energy, and so we sleep better. And what's really interesting, and this may apply to even with your mother, when women get diagnosed with fibromyalgia, 95% of them are misdiagnosed. And most often it's due to vitamin D deficiency, hypothyroidism that's not properly detected, or testosterone deficiency, or a combination thereof. And when testosterone drops, we get muscle aches and pains, we become depressed, we lose our libido, and they all of a sudden they say, okay, you've got all these muscle aches and pains, they don't really know what's happening with you, and boom, they're labeled fibromyalgic. And unfortunately, and then they go through their whole system, put on antidepressants and the whole kit and caboodle, which I'm sure you're painfully aware of.
Yes, indeed. That is something that I've certainly witnessed in my family and in other patients.
Yeah.
So this is fascinating to me in the fact that when we're talking about these hormones, are we talking about synthetics, or are these coming from animals, or what specifically are these hormones sourced from?
So when we actually compound and make hormones, so everything starts actually with the progesterone base, and actually compounded hormones come from Mexican yams typically. And people say, why don't I eat Mexican yams? So you have to eat a whole bowl of Mexican yams to have any effect. But they convert the first base product to progesterone, and then everything converts from there, the estradiol or the progesterone, testosterone. And whenever we're replacing hormones, I always tell my patients it's imperative, number one, that it's bioidentical, meaning biomimetic is a better term for it, meaning it mimics exactly the molecule that your body's secreting. So the ovary is making 17 beta estradiol, and it's making a pure testosterone derivative and pure progesterone. That's what we want to give back. But a lot of the commercially available products like Premarin and Prempro, which we largely don't use anymore, but some docs do, is a synthetic derivative. And when you look at FDA approved commercial drugs, and why I prefer compounds is most FDA approved drugs, so how they got FDA approval is because a company patented it and brought it to the FDA. But the only way you can patent something is it has to be unique. So how do you make it unique? You either put it into a unique delivery form, or you change the molecular structure so it has something unique about it, which then becomes a synthetic derivative, which isn't identical. So I prefer to use products that are bioidentical. And not to say there are some FDA approved products like Vivel patch, estrase cream, which are bioidentical, but it's very limited and it's one dose, and I can't customize. I can't use a one size fits all thing for my patients. I need to make it unique and very, very specific to my patients. And as I mentioned, there's also 0 FDA approved products for testosterone, and it's our most important hormone. So the only way I can get testosterone bioidentical or at all is by compounding it. And my preference is actually compounded pellets, which we can go through if you'd like. So,
just to make clear for the listeners, most of us aren't familiar with compounding. What specifically is compounding?
So compounding is, you have either mom and pop pharmacies, or there's actually large pharmacies like a Belmar pharmacy or Anazao, various other ones. Belmar is probably the one with the best reputation in the country, which actually have what are called, they're almost like pharmaceutical companies. They're held to that degree of standard and regulation, but they do bulk product prescriptions. So for instance, if I were to write a prescription for a compounded product, then send it to my local pharmacy, they would go back in their little room and they would mix it up and do it specific to that patient. But they're using FDA approved products as their base. They're just kind of tweaking the doses or adding something specific if there's an allergy or something to help with those patients. Or in my practice, for instance, I specialize in hormone pellet therapies, which look like little Tic Tacs, but they're pure hormone granules, and we put them under the skin, which do a slow delivery over 3 to 4 months. But I can send an order into the larger company. And Belmar, for instance, they can do those one-off prescriptions one at a time, but also they can send me a bulk of, say, 100 pellets to put into my office. because they are at such a high level of regulation in what they're making that they can do that for physicians. And then I can go back and pick out what doses I need right there and then on the spot for my patients. But compounding pharmacies get actually a real bad rap. Everyone wants to think, oh, well, they're not regulated. They don't have any, they basically can run rogue in their production and giving of hormones to patients. But these people are highly trained pharmacists. They undergo high levels of regulations with the DEA and the state pharmacy boards. And then if you're a company like Belmar that does these large batch, they're under basically certified CMP pharmaceutical standards and all these high level, they get colonoscopies by the DNA and FDA all the time. So they're highly regulated. They're very safe. And unfortunately, they've been given a bad rap because there's people working against having that availability for our patients.
So to simplify, compounding simply means that you are tailoring a formula specifically to that individual.
Exactly. So because not everybody needs, so for instance, if I write, not to say I would ever write for Premin or Prempro, but if I write for that medication or that hormone, it's a synthetic first off, but also I have very fixed doses that I can use, and that's not with anything else. Where I can compound, let's say a sublingual that would get dissolved underneath the tongue, which is better absorbed. You want to also avoid tablets because they process through the liver and cause clotting risk. Where if I put something under the tongue, that patient's not going to have that clotting risk. But also if I compound it, I could say I could do a little bit of estradiol, I can add some testosterone with it, and I can adjust those doses very finely for that patient and get it dialed in perfect for that patient versus giving them one dose where it's a crapshoot if I'm going to get what I need from it.
Why exactly is there this bias against compounding pharmacy?
Well, and I'm going to say this with some gingerness, but because I used to work for a big big pharmacies. I worked for Procter & Gamble, a pharmaceutical company, for 10 years. They did some wonderful things, and FDA approved drugs are good in the right scenarios. Pharmaceutical companies do great work in the majority of what they're doing, but there's also, there's a big push by a lot of, let's say, not so altruistic companies. They're trying to eliminate compounded hormones because they're taking a significant profit away from them. If you think about the pharmaceutical industry as a whole, if we're not sick, they don't make money. And imagine for a second, we put women on hormones, which are the appropriate treatment for them. We wouldn't need antidepressants. We wouldn't need sleep medications. We wouldn't need beta blockers to control our heart rate. I mean, there's all this money being made off the backs of us being sick, and it's not right. And unfortunately, pharmaceutical companies can be nefarious in how they go about it, where they can even use clinical guidelines and various things as Trojan horses to prevent doctors from prescribing their therapies. And right now, the FDA in bed kind of with pharmaceutical companies, because they get a larger majority of their funding from big pharma, are trying to push out compounding pharmacies so that only the commercially available products are available for women. And here's what's very, very scary and alarming is if they eliminate the ability for compounds, women aren't going to have any availability for testosterone at all. Only men will have it. And they're trying to suggest that we should use male products off label, which is medically inappropriate. So it's actually quite alarming that there's this big push to have this happen and eliminate a lot of what's going on in the compounding space by trying to suggest that there's not a clinical need for it in women, in particular testosterone, which shows a complete ignorance of their lack of understanding of hormones in women. And also that there may be some safety concerns because they can't study every single dose that goes out of a compounding pharmacy, but that's the whole point is we want to individualize it. It's not one size fits all.
You are speaking my language because it's the same sort of idea with traditional Chinese medicine and Chinese herbal medicine. We tailor our formulas specifically to the patient and the symptoms that they're exhibiting at that moment in time.
Right.
And then we continue to work with them. And as things change, then we tailor the formulas as needed to make those changes happen. And so this is important. What I'm so amazed about here is that I haven't heard much about this in any sort of mainstream media. You seem to be kind of a voice in the wilderness, if
Yeah,
you,
it's really unfortunate, but the media, I mean, they scared us in 2002 against hormones because they totally misrepresented a study that basically suggested that women were going to die of breast cancer 1 in 4 from hormone therapies, when actually, when they corrected the data and actually looked at it, it was only 8 women out of 10,000 more that had breast cancer potentially, which is less alarming than 26%, but you can manipulate statistics and spread a message any way you want. But also that data was incorrect. And when they ultimately looked at it, that study became neutral for breast cancer. So the media tends to latch onto things that may not necessarily be appropriate, but unfortunately the damage has been done. And right now, there's all this information coming out. And as I mentioned, Big Pharma is using these highly conflicted authors to put out publications to scare people about compounding hormones. And unfortunately, we're not getting equal voice on the other side because we don't, unfortunately, Big Pharma's got a lot of money and they've got a lot of power against folks. So unfortunately, we're kind of like the David and Goliath scenario, trying to fight it and trying to get our message out, which is why we really appreciate being on shows like yours, because it's helping to spread the word. And I think it's important because this is going on very subtly and very quietly behind the scenes. And what's going to happen is it's going to be too late. By the time people figure out, we won't have our hormones that we need. And it's going to disproportionately affect women over men. And it scares the hell out of me, honestly, to think that this potentially could happen, where we would lose our right to have our compounded hormones. So it's really important that folks know what's happening, really make sure that they get messages to their legislators to ensure that they protect this right, because there's movements and lobbyists, and we're trying to fight right now by letting people in Congress know what's happening and trying to push back. But we have a big uphill battle on our hands.
I can only assume that you've got a target on your back.
Oh yes, it's interesting is that folks in my area of medicine, restorative medicine, or some people, I hate the term anti-aging, but I prefer restorative medicine and hormonal health. We are looked at by a large portion of the medical society as heretics. And unfortunately, the good news is it's changing, because women and patients are demanding more, and there's more and more of us getting into this field, and we're becoming a much more vocal minority. But it's still conventional dogmatic wisdom, because doctors don't take the time to learn the real data about hormones, is that they're dangerous for women. And that's, well, there's no data about compounded, or they just don't know the data. And it's unfortunate. And they continue to propagate it. So folks like us are constantly fighting that battle, and we're constantly yielding slings and arrows. It's not from our patients. The patients don't give us problems. It's our other colleagues, which is really unfortunate. In medicine is all about dialogue, and how we grow and learn is by having those conversations and sharing the different controversies, and not just saying, oh, well, they don't know what they're talking about, and try to shut them down. I mean, that's not how and you're seeing it with COVID right now too. And it's interesting how folks that are going against the mainstream media, the standard walking orders and marching orders, are getting a lot of pushback at board levels, or the FDA's sanctioning them and different things. So it's really unfortunate that conversation and dialogue is being shut down, and that's exactly what medicine should be. So,
if people want more information, if they want to learn more about compounding pharmacies, if they want to learn how they can work with you regarding reducing their hot flashes and restoring quote unquote sanity, how can they find you?
well, the easiest way, my website is a good conduit to other information, and also for a whole boatload of information. It's drhotflash.com, so drhotflash.com. So there's links to my medical practice. So we see people virtually and various other things. There's also links to my book, which I wrote, which is a hormonal health survival guide, how to prevent your doctor from slowly killing you. Has tons of great information and resources in that. And then there's also links to training institutes. So I train a lot of clinicians across the country about hormonal therapy. So there's blogs and articles and all kinds of stuff that people can turn to there. And if they want a lot more information about compounding pharmacies in particular, I would direct them to Belmar Pharma. Belmar is BELMAR, Belmar Pharmacy Solutions, one of the best in the country. And they've got tons of resources on their website as well.
Cool. Well, I will include links in the show notes.
Great.
to your website, your book, and Belmar so that folks can find that fairly easily. And I'm going to switch it up a little bit.
Yes,
I'm going
sir.
to ask you the question I ask all my patients, and that is all my patients. Did I just say all my patients?
You
All my
did.
guests. All my guests. You're not my patient. Goodness.
I would like to be your patient. You sound like you rock at what you do.
So the question, Angela, is what is your definition of Foxy? What does being Foxy mean to Angela DeRosa?
I think being Foxy is confidence. Just seeing a woman that just, or even men or women that just kind of hold their shoulders back. They walk into a room with this confidence and just that air of, I've got this, you know, it just like they feel comfortable in their skin. They know who they are. They're not apologetic for that. I mean, to me, that is really foxy and sexy, you know. So I think confidence would be number one for me.
And who's Foxy in your world at the moment?
Oh, I have lots of foxy around me. My partner is very foxy, but I also have my tribe, my girls who are my dearest friends who are, I think, just they own themselves, and I think they're tremendously foxy, so, which is why I hang with them.
Uh-huh. Well, you see, and I think that's important to have those people around. When you're surrounded by people who have those attributes, it helps you kind of raise the level yourself.
Yeah, and to me, and I know we often talk about Foxy as external beauty, but to me, it's more about internal confidence and beauty and humor, and just, as I said, knowing and owning yourself and not apologizing for that. And one of the reasons I love hormones so much is it gives us that confidence often to feel that way. And when we lose it, we don't feel good about ourselves. So.
And when you're not feeling that Foxy confidence, what do you do to help reclaim that?
Oh, yeah. So I think it's important. To me, I'm a very extroverted introvert, so which surprises a lot of people, but I gain my energy by going in. So for myself, if I'm ever feeling like I need to make a big decision or I'm not feeling good about myself, I tend to withdraw. I would go away for a long weekend or go somewhere quiet by myself, a spa, a meditative place, somewhere I can go hike or do some yoga. I mean, or just even sitting with a book at a beach, but I just need to get away and recharge and take in my external natural environment versus all the stimulus from the world. So that's mine. So how about you?
How about me? Well,
Yeah.
I'm similar in that regard. I too am very much an introvert. And so I find that if I take time for prayer and stillness, or delving into a good science fiction fantasy novel,
Good for you.
that's very helpful for me. So yes, indeed. Well, our time is
Yeah, it's
just,
funny. I wouldn't have struck you as an introvert as well, but
yeah. It definitely takes some practice, you know. Most definitely. Our time is just about up here, Angela. So I'm going to ask you one last question. And that is, what would be your one piece of advice for a woman who's going through perimenopause and is looking for help? Where should she go?
I think that first and foremost, always trust your instincts and trust your gut, because if you know something wrong, something is wrong, and not to let somebody dissuade you. And one of the chapters at the end of my book has a whole checklist of things that you can identify if something is hormonally off, but also questions to ask doctors to know if you're in the right place or not, and also resources to find the right doctors. Again, we see patients in our practice virtually if people are across the country and also locally. But also you can, through Belmar Compounding Pharmacy, you can also find resources and links to physicians that do this kind of work. But again, my book at the back of it has a great resource on how to find the right people, because you need to look for restorative doctors, functional medicine are another keywords, or hormonal specialists. Don't rely on your primary care, because they may draw blood work and not know how to interpret it and tell you everything's fine when it's not. So.
Excellent. Well, folks, Dr. Angela DeRosa,
Thank you,
Check her out.
Terry Fox. I love
Thank
it.
you. Thank you so much for taking the time and being that voice to stand up for women and for their health. You are doing God's work here.
Thank you so much, Terry. I so appreciate you.